David Thorne, the tech magnate, laughed dismissively at the chaos. "This mess is easily fixed." His daughter Lily, barely 6, looked up, her small voice trembling. "Please, Daddy, don't leave us." What he saw next shattered his world forever. The roar of the city traffic was a distant hum to David Thorne as his sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway of his sprawling suburban estate. He felt the familiar ache in his shoulders, a dull throb behind his eyes, remnants of a grueling transatlantic flight and a week of relentless negotiations. His empire, built on innovation and ruthlessness, demanded constant vigilance, often at the expense of his personal life, a sacrifice he had long justified. He stepped out, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the stale cabin air, and inhaled deeply, hoping to clear the lingering exhaustion from his mind. The grand house, usually a beacon of quiet luxury, felt unusually still, an unsettling quiet that pricked at the edges of his weary consciousness. He pushed open the heavy oak door, expecting the usual warm, if somewhat subdued, greeting from Maria, the housekeeper, and perhaps the sleepy babble of his youngest, Leo, but no one was there to meet him in the opulent foyer. A strange metallic smell hung faintly in the air, clashing with the usual scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. He walked through the silent living room, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors, a sense of unease growing with each step. He called out, his voice a little hoarser than usual. "Maria? Lily? Leo?" Silence answered him, thick and oppressive, until a faint whimper followed by a choked sob reached his ears from the direction of the kitchen. His heart, usually a steady drumbeat of calculated ambition, lurched with a sudden icy fear. He quickened his pace, the exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a surge of adrenaline, his mind racing through countless dark possibilities. He rounded the corner into the expansive, sun-drenched kitchen, a space usually filled with the aroma of freshly baked goods and playful chatter, only to be met with a scene that instantly froze his blood. His daughter Lily stood near the island, her small frame hunched, her usually vibrant blonde hair plastered to her face, dripping with what appeared to be milk. Her clothes, a light blue dress, were soaked and clinging to her, the white liquid staining the pristine floor around her. Her tiny shoulders shook with silent sobs, her face buried in her hands, utterly humiliated and heartbroken. Before her stood Maria, the housekeeper, usually so composed and deferential, now holding an empty milk carton, a look of cold, unwavering displeasure etched on her features, a stark contrast to the mask of maternal warmth she typically wore. In a playpen nearby, baby Leo was wailing, his face red and tear-streaked, his small fists flailing against the bars, clearly distressed and ignored. Maria's voice, usually soft and melodious, was a harsh whisper, filled with a chilling impatience. "Look what you've done, you clumsy girl. Now clean this mess up and don't you dare make a sound." Lily, through her tears, managed to stammer out, "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Her voice barely audible, a fragile plea for mercy. It was then, as Maria raised her hand, not to strike, but in a gesture of dismissive disgust, that David's carefully constructed world of order and control shattered into a million pieces. The sight of his precious daughter, soaked, trembling, and apologizing for an unseen transgression, while his youngest son cried out in distress, unleashed a primal fury within him. A guttural roar escaped his lips, a sound born of shock, terror, and an instinct to protect that he hadn't realized still dwelled so fiercely within him. "Stop!" he bellowed, the single word echoing through the silent house, cutting through Maria's cruel whisper and Lily's heartbreaking sobs, a thunderclap in the oppressive stillness. Maria flinched, her eyes widening in genuine surprise as she spun around to face him, the empty milk carton clattering to the floor. The carefully constructed facade of the devoted housekeeper began to crack, revealing a sliver of something far more sinister underneath. Maria, caught in the act, quickly composed herself, her initial shock giving way to a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned fully, holding her hands up in a gesture of innocent concern. "Mr. Thorne, you're back. Oh, thank goodness. Lily here, she had a little accident. Spilled milk everywhere, clumsy thing. I was just trying to help her clean it up, poor dear." Her voice, now saccharine sweet, was a stark contrast to the sharp, cold whisper David had just heard. She gestured vaguely at the puddle on the floor, ignoring the wailing baby in the playpen, her focus entirely on him, a performance clearly designed to deflect and reassure. David, however, was no longer seeing the devoted housekeeper he had hired, the woman who had seamlessly managed his household for the past 2 years, becoming an indispensable fixture in his children's lives. The image of Lily, drenched and whimpering, her small body trembling with a fear that went beyond a spilled drink, was seared into his mind, eclipsing Maria's carefully constructed facade. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical in boardrooms, were now clouded with a raw, protective rage he hadn't known he possessed. He walked past Maria, his movements stiff, his gaze fixed on Lily. He knelt, ignoring the cold milk seeping into his expensive suit trousers, and gently took his daughter into his arms. Her small body was rigid with tension, and she clung to him, burying her face into his chest, her sobs finally breaking free, louder and more desperate now that she was safe in his embrace. "Daddy, she made me," Lily whispered, her voice muffled, the words barely audible but potent enough to pierce through David's lingering doubt. Maria, seeing her control slip, interjected quickly, a touch of steel returning to her voice. "Now, Lily, that's not true. I simply asked you to clean up your mess. You know how important tidiness is." But David wasn't listening to Maria anymore. He was focused on the fragile weight of his daughter in his arms, the rapid beat of her heart against his and the faint, almost imperceptible red mark blooming on her cheek, hidden beneath a strand of wet hair. David Thorne had built his empire on a foundation of cold logic and unyielding ambition. A tech magnate whose name was synonymous with innovation, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But beneath the polished exterior of the successful entrepreneur lay a chasm of grief that had swallowed a part of him whole. 2 years prior, the vibrant light of his life, his beloved wife, Eleanor, had departed during the difficult childbirth of their son, Leo. Her loss had been a seismic event, leaving David adrift in a sea of sorrow, unable to reconcile the joy of a new life with the devastating void left by the woman he adored. He had poured himself into his work, believing that relentless productivity could numb the pain, a misguided attempt to fill the gaping hole in his soul. His children, Lily, then 4, and newborn Leo, became collateral damage in his emotional withdrawal. He loved them, of course, with a fierce, if distant affection, but the daily demands of parenting felt like an insurmountable burden, a constant reminder of what he had lost. Maria, the seemingly benevolent housekeeper, had stepped into this void, presenting herself as a godsend, a compassionate figure who promised to bring order and warmth back into their fractured home. Maria had arrived with impeccable references, an almost angelic smile, and a calming demeanor that immediately put David at ease. She spoke of her love for children, her experience, and her dedication to creating a nurturing environment. In his grief-stricken state, David had seen her as the solution, a surrogate mother figure who could provide the care and stability he felt incapable of offering. He paid her handsomely, gave her free rein, and trusted her implicitly, allowing her to become the primary caregiver for Lily and Leo. He had convinced himself that his long hours at the office were for them, for their future, a justification that now tasted like ash in his mouth. Lily, a bright and sensitive child of 6, had always been a ray of sunshine, but lately David had noticed a subtle shift. Her laughter seemed less spontaneous. Her eyes sometimes held a shadow he couldn't quite decipher, and she had become unusually quiet, often retreating into herself. He had dismissed it as the natural shyness of a child growing up, or perhaps still processing the absence of her mother, a guilt that now twisted in his gut. Leo, barely 2, was a sweet, curious baby, but his cries often sounded more frantic than typical infant fussing, and David had often found him unusually clingy when he was home. Maria, meanwhile, was a master of subtle manipulation. She would praise David's dedication, reinforcing his belief that his work was paramount, subtly discouraging him from spending too much time at home. She would often comment on Lily's stubbornness or Leo's colic, framing their natural childish behaviors as difficult, subtly eroding David's confidence in his own parenting instincts. To the outside world, she was the epitome of professionalism and warmth, a pillar of support for the grieving Thorne family. But behind closed doors, a different persona emerged, one of cold calculation and thinly veiled cruelty. Her motivations were a complex web of resentment and a deep-seated desire for financial security, perhaps even a twisted sense of entitlement. She had watched David's immense wealth from the periphery, Her own life marked by hardship and perceived injustices, and a bitter envy had begun to fester, transforming into a plan to exploit his vulnerability and his children's innocence. She saw the house, the luxury, the children, not as a family to care for, but as assets to control, a means to an end. David held Lily tighter, his gaze sweeping from his daughter's tear-streaked face to the wailing Leo, then finally settling on Maria. The mask of innocence she wore felt thin, transparent now, the faint red mark on Lily's cheek, the raw terror in her eyes, the desperate plea he had just heard. It all coalesced into a horrifying certainty. He had been blind, willfully so, wrapped in his own sorrow and ambition. He had entrusted his most precious possessions, his children, to a viper in plain sight. The silence in the kitchen, once oppressive, was now deafening, punctuated only by Leo's cries and Lily's shuddering breaths. A new resolve, cold and sharp, began to form in David's heart, replacing the initial shock. He would uncover the truth no matter the cost. He would protect his children no matter what shadows lurked. The game had changed, and Maria, for all her cunning, had just made a powerful enemy out of a man who had finally woken up. David's eyes, usually cool and calculating, now burned with an intensity Maria had never witnessed. He held Lily closer, the small, trembling body a searing testament to his devastating oversight. He looked at Maria, his voice a low growl that vibrated with suppressed fury. "Maria, I heard what you said and I saw what you did." His words hung heavy in the air, stripping away her flimsy pretense of innocence, leaving her momentarily speechless. The saccharine smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something colder, harder, before she quickly regained her composure, her eyes darting nervously between David and the still sobbing Lily. She opened her mouth to argue, perhaps to spin another tale of childish mischief, but David cut her off, his gaze unwavering, leaving no room for her practiced deceptions. He had finally seen past the facade, and the truth, raw and ugly, was beginning to dawn on him. He gently lifted Lily, cradling her against his chest, her small arms tightening around his neck as he rose. He walked past Maria as if she were invisible, his entire being focused on his children. He scooped up a wailing Leo from the playpen, the baby's cries instantly quieting as he felt the warmth of his father's embrace. He carried both children upstairs, the weight of them in his arms a profound physical manifestation of the emotional burden he now carried. In the quiet sanctity of Lily's bathroom, he carefully wiped the milk from her hair and face, his heart aching with every gentle stroke. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible red mark on her cheek more clearly now, a silent bruise that screamed volumes. He changed her into dry clothes, his hands clumsy with a mixture of love and guilt, and then tended to Leo, ensuring his comfort. He stayed with them, reading a story in hushed tones, rocking Leo to sleep in his arms, feeling a connection that had been dulled by grief and ambition, now reigniting with a fierce, protective flame. As the children finally drifted into a restless sleep, David sat beside Lily's bed, the soft glow of the nightlight casting long shadows on the walls. The image of his daughter, drenched and terrified, replayed in his mind, a constant, tormenting loop. He thought of Eleanor, her vibrant spirit, her unwavering love for their children. How could he have been so blind, so consumed by his own sorrow and the demands of his empire, that he failed to see the quiet suffering unfolding under his own roof? A wave of crushing guilt washed over him, heavy and suffocating. He had sought solace in work, believing he was providing for his children, when in reality he had abandoned them to the care of someone who clearly harbored a sinister agenda. This profound realization, though painful, solidified his resolve. He would no longer be a distant figure. He would be a vigilant protector, an unwavering force for justice. In the days that followed, David moved through his grand house with a newfound awareness, his senses acutely tuned to every subtle shift, every quiet interaction. He observed Maria, watching her like a hawk, noting the almost imperceptible changes in her demeanor. When he was present, she was the picture of an attentive, doting caregiver, her voice soft, her movements graceful, her attention seemingly devoted to the children. She would praise Lily's drawings, offer Leo extra snacks, and subtly highlight her own indispensable role in maintaining the household's delicate balance. But David also caught glimpses of the other Maria, the quick, sharp glances she'd cast at Lily when she thought he wasn't looking, The way Leo would flinch and retreat when she approached too quickly, the sudden, hushed silences that would descend upon the children's play area when she entered. His heart ached with each observation, confirming his deepest fears. He started noticing patterns he had previously dismissed. The children's bedroom doors, sometimes found locked from the outside when he returned home unexpectedly early, a detail he had once attributed to Maria's diligent efforts to ensure their safety during her chores. Now it felt like a cage. He saw faint, almost faded marks on Lily's arms, small bruises that she would instinctively try to cover with her sleeve, or a quick shift of her body when his gaze lingered. He remembered conversations where Maria would subtly undermine Lily's confidence, framing her natural curiosity as disobedience or her imaginative play as destructive. The housekeeper's carefully constructed persona was crumbling under the weight of his renewed scrutiny, revealing the calculated cruelty that lay beneath. David began his quiet investigation, starting with the most intimate corners of his life. He felt an inexplicable pull towards Eleanor's study, a room he had largely avoided since her departure, unable to bear the poignant reminders of her presence. He started sifting through boxes of her personal effects, old journals, letters, and mementos, hoping to find some clue, some fragment of her foresight that might guide him. He remembered Eleanor's keen intuition, her ability to see through facades, a trait he now desperately wished he possessed. His fingers trembled as he went through her things, each item a bittersweet memory, until his hand brushed against a small, ornate wooden box tucked away at the bottom of a chest. Inside, nestled among dried flowers and a silver locket, was a thick envelope, addressed to him in Eleanor's elegant, familiar script. His heart pounded as he opened it, the paper crackling softly, releasing a faint scent of Eleanor's favorite lavender. It was a long letter, written in the weeks before Leo's birth, a time when Eleanor had felt a quiet unease, a premonition she hadn't been able to fully articulate. She wrote of her hopes for their future, her boundless love for Lily and her excitement, tinged with a subtle anxiety about the arrival of Leo. But within the loving words, David found a passage that chilled him to the bone. She mentioned a new housekeeper she was considering, a woman named Maria, who seemed efficient and kind. But Eleanor had felt a strange, almost imperceptible coldness in her eyes, a fleeting moment of something that didn't quite sit right. She had dismissed it then, attributing it to her own anxieties, but urged David, if anything ever happened to her, to always trust his instincts and to always protect their children above all else, to truly see them, listen to them. Eleanor's words, a message from beyond the veil of loss, resonated with a profound and terrifying clarity. She had seen it or sensed it even then. The subtle warning, dismissed by her own loving heart, now served as a beacon in David's desperate quest for truth. The letter was not merely a clue, it was a sacred trust, a final plea from the woman he had loved, urging him to open his eyes and protect their legacy. Armed with Eleanor's implicit warning and his own growing suspicions, David knew he could no longer afford to be a passive observer. He would delve deeper, meticulously uncovering every layer of Maria's deception, driven by an unyielding desire to safeguard his children and honor the memory of his beloved wife. The fight had only just begun, and David Thorne, the man who had lost himself in grief, was now fully awake, ready to confront the darkness. David's presence in the house shifted the atmosphere, a silent, unspoken tension now thick in the air, a palpable undercurrent beneath the veneer of normalcy. Maria maintained her facade, a smile always ready, a comforting word on her lips, her movements graceful and seemingly efficient. Yet David, with his newfound sharpened gaze, saw the micro-expressions, the fleeting shadows in her eyes when she thought herself unobserved, the almost imperceptible clenching of her jaw. He noticed how she would speak to Lily, her voice low and sweet when he was near, a picture of maternal affection. But if he merely stepped into another room, the tone would subtly harden, a sharpness that made Lily flinch, her small shoulders drawing inward. He saw Lily's small hands tremble when Maria asked her to fetch something, her movements hesitant, as if anticipating a reprimand for an unseen transgression. Leo, too, seemed to sense the shift, his usually joyful babbling replaced by a more watchful silence when Maria was in the room, his eyes following her every move with an unnerving wariness for a child so young. The faint mark on Lily's cheek had faded, but David's awakened gaze now spotted other, more subtle signs that chilled him to the bone. A bruise on her arm explained away by Maria as a tumble during play, but which felt too perfectly circular, too distinct in its outline. A sudden, sharp cry from Leo, quickly stifled by Maria's hand over his mouth, an action she immediately justified as calming him down with a gentle touch. David also noticed the children's appetite had dwindled, their plates often left half-eaten, a stark contrast to their previous healthy eating habits, as if the joy had been sucked out of their meals. They seemed to retreat further into themselves, their once bright spirits dimmed, replaced by a quiet vigilance, a constant scanning of their environment for signs of Maria's displeasure. The locked doors, which he had previously dismissed as a safety measure, now felt like a sinister symbol of their confinement, a deliberate act to isolate them from any potential comfort or escape. A profound, suffocating guilt gnawed at David, a constant companion that fueled his determination, twisting in his gut with every new observation. He had been so blind, so consumed by his own grief and the relentless pursuit of wealth, that he had missed the silent suffering of his children, the quiet pleas echoing through the grand halls of his home. He spent his nights poring over Eleanor's letter, each word a painful reminder of her wisdom and his own folly, a beacon in the darkness. He began to subtly question Lily, not directly about Maria, but about her day, her games, her feelings, trying to draw out the truth without frightening her further. Lily, still hesitant, would offer fragments, whispers of being naughty for not cleaning fast enough or bad for making a noise. Her innocent words painted a chilling picture of constant criticism and emotional manipulation, a slow, methodical erosion of her self-worth, a psychological torment as damaging as any physical blow. Driven by a growing sense of urgency, David decided to investigate Maria's background more thoroughly than he had initially, a task he now regretted, not having performed with greater diligence. Her references, impeccable as they were, now felt suspiciously polished, too perfect, as if crafted by a master manipulator. He began by discreetly accessing his household accounts, noticing small, seemingly insignificant discrepancies over the past 2 years. Minor charges for household supplies that seemed inflated or small, regular cash withdrawals that didn't align with the family's needs. These amounts were negligible for a man of his wealth, easily overlooked, but they painted a picture of calculated, consistent theft, a slow drip of betrayal. He then remembered Maria's subtle inquiries about Eleanor's estate, her casual questions about the children's inheritance, always framed as a concern for their future. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Maria's greed was far more insidious than simple pilfering. He delved deeper, accessing his late wife's financial records, a task he had delegated to his estate lawyer, trusting everything was in order in his grief-stricken state. What he found sent a jolt of icy horror through him, a betrayal that cut deeper than he could have imagined. Several small but significant transfers had been made from Eleanor's separate trust funds, funds specifically earmarked for the children's education and future, to an offshore account. The transactions were cleverly disguised, routed through shell companies, a labyrinth of financial deceit, but the digital breadcrumbs, once followed by David's expert eye, led back to a name he recognized, a distant relative of Maria's, a man who had suddenly come into a modest sum of money recently. The scale of her deception was far greater than he had imagined. She wasn't just stealing from him, she was systematically siphoning away his children's future, exploiting the very grief that had rendered him vulnerable and blind. David, using his formidable tech skills, installed a discreet surveillance system throughout the house, tiny cameras hidden in innocuous objects. His genius now turned to protecting his family. He couldn't trust his own eyes alone anymore. He needed irrefutable proof, evidence that would stand up to any challenge. The first night he watched the live feed, his heart hammered against his ribs, a sickening rhythm of dread. He saw Maria, after putting the children to bed, enter Lily's room. Instead of a gentle good night, she whispered harsh words, threatening to take away Lily's favorite stuffed animal if she didn't behave and stop lying to her father. He saw her deliberately ignore Leo's cries from his crib, leaving him to wail until exhaustion claimed him, his small body trembling in the dark. He saw her in the kitchen, casually pocketing an antique silver spoon, a small but valuable heirloom from Eleanor's family, a smile of cold satisfaction on her face. The footage was a horrifying confirmation, a chilling testament to her calculated cruelty and insatiable greed. The weight of the evidence solidified David's resolve, transforming his guilt into righteous anger, a fierce determination he hadn't felt since building his empire. He began spending every waking moment he could with Lily and Leo, his work commitments now secondary, pushed aside for the true priority. He would sit on the floor building towering block castles with Leo, his laughter, once a rare sound, now filling the nursery with warmth. He would read to Lily, letting her choose the stories, listening intently to her imaginative tales, encouraging her to express herself, to draw, to sing, to simply be a child. He took them to the park, pushed them on swings until their giggles echoed through the trees, and held their hands as they explored the world with newfound wonder. Slowly, tentatively, the children began to blossom under his renewed attention, like fragile flowers unfurling towards the sun. Lily's eyes regained a flicker of their former sparkle, her smiles less forced, her small hand reaching for his with a newfound trust. Leo, though still wary of Maria, would now babble happily in his father's arms, his tiny fingers clutching David's shirt, a silent promise of an unbreakable love finally rediscovered. The bond between David and his children deepened with each passing day, a fragile but resilient thread, weaving itself into a strong, unbreakable tapestry of love. He saw the world anew through their eyes, discovering the simple joys of a child's boundless imagination, the pure, unadulterated delight in a colorful butterfly, or the quiet wonder of a story shared. Lily, slowly shedding her shell of fear, began to confide in him, not always in direct words, but in the way she drew pictures of herself and Leo hiding from a shadowy figure. For in the stories she invented, where a brave knight rescued a small princess from a cruel witch, David listened, his heart aching with every nuance, every unspoken plea. Understanding that these were her ways of processing the terror she had endured, he would gently reassure her, telling her she was brave, that he was there, and that no one would ever hurt her or Leo again, his voice a steady anchor in her stormy young world. Leo, too, flourished under his father's constant presence, his baby giggles returning, his small hands reaching out for David with an unshakable trust, a stark contrast to his previous wary demeanor around Maria. Maria, meanwhile, felt the subtle shift in power, a growing unease that permeated her carefully constructed domain. David's constant presence, his newfound attentiveness to the children, meant fewer opportunities for her to exert her cruel control or to continue her insidious pilfering. She became more agitated, her mask of subservience occasionally slipping to reveal flashes of irritation or thinly veiled resentment, especially when David would gently correct her or intercede on the children's behalf. She would attempt to regain control through manipulative tactics, trying to drive a wedge between David and his children, whispering to Lily that her father was too busy for games, or subtly suggesting to David that Lily was being overly dramatic. But David, now armed with the truth and the damning footage, saw through her ploys, his resolve hardening with each transparent attempt at manipulation. He maintained a calm, observant exterior, never letting on the full extent of his knowledge, knowing that the time for a direct confrontation was not yet ripe. One evening, as David reviewed more of the surveillance footage, a new, more chilling revelation came to light. He saw Maria late at night, not just pocketing small items, but meticulously going through Eleanor's personal effects, not just in the study, but in the master bedroom, where a hidden safe containing some of Eleanor's most cherished jewelry and a small but significant cache of bearer bonds had been kept. The footage showed her, with a chillingly practiced hand, manipulating the safe's combination, then carefully removing a handful of the bonds, replacing them with expertly forged duplicates. She wasn't just stealing cash or small heirlooms, she was systematically dismantling Eleanor's legacy, targeting the very financial instruments meant to secure the children's long-term future. This wasn't merely greed. It was a calculated, cold-blooded act of betrayal that twisted the knife in David's already wounded heart, a direct assault on his, beloved wife's memory. The realization that Maria was not only abusing his children, but also desecrating Eleanor's Memory with her calculated theft ignited a fresh wave of fury within David. He remembered Eleanor's meticulous nature. Her dedication to ensuring their children's future was secure. The bearer bonds were a specific, sentimental investment she had made, a testament to her hopes and dreams for Lily and Leo. Maria's audacious act felt like a personal insult, a deliberate mockery of everything Eleanor stood for. David clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists, a silent vow passing his lips. He would not only ensure justice for his children's suffering, but also for Eleanor's violated trust. He began to cross-reference the dates of the bond thefts with the offshore transfers he had uncovered, realizing with a sickening certainty that Maria had been orchestrating this elaborate scheme for months, perhaps even years, slowly siphoning away their inheritance. Armed with this irrefutable digital and financial evidence, David knew he needed to move swiftly and decisively. He couldn't risk Maria discovering his investigation, potentially escalating her cruelty or causing her to flee. He reached out to his most trusted legal counsel, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah Jennings, explaining the situation in hushed, urgent tones. Sarah, a mother herself, listened with a growing sense of horror, her initial professional detachment quickly giving way to a fierce determination to help. She advised David on the best course of action, emphasizing the need for discretion and ensuring the children's safety above all else. They began to build an airtight case, compiling the surveillance footage, the financial records, Eleanor's letter, and David's meticulous observations, leaving no stone unturned, no detail unexamined. David also found an unexpected ally in his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind-hearted woman who had often watched Lily and Leo play in the garden. She had always been fond of the children, often bringing them homemade cookies, but had also harbored a quiet suspicion about Maria. She had noticed the children's sudden shyness, their reluctance to wave to her when Maria was present, and the way Maria would often rush them inside if Mrs. Gable lingered too long at the fence. David, in a carefully worded conversation, confided some of his concerns, and Mrs. Gable, her eyes filled with a sad understanding, recounted small, unsettling incidents she had witnessed, Lily crying silently behind a bush, Maria's harsh tone when she thought no one was listening, and the way Leo's innocent babbling would instantly cease at Maria's approach. Her observations, though anecdotal, corroborated David's evidence, adding a human layer to the cold, hard facts, painting a clearer picture of Maria's insidious reign of terror. The tension in the house became almost unbearable, a silent battle of wills playing out beneath the surface. Maria, sensing David's growing vigilance, became more cautious, more subtle in her cruelty, but also more resentful. She would leave small pointed notes for David about the children's misbehavior or demands, attempting to paint them as difficult, hoping to re-establish her narrative. But David simply ignored them, his focus unwavering. He continued to spend every possible moment with Lily and Leo, showering them with the affection and attention they had been denied for so long. He saw Lily's confidence slowly return, her laughter ringing through the house, a joyous sound that chased away the shadows. Leo, now crawling and babbling with infectious energy, would often pull himself up on David's leg, his tiny arms reaching for a hug, a silent testament to the healing power of unconditional love finally present in their lives. The children were his strength, his purpose, and he would not fail them again. The air in the grand house, once thick with unspoken fear, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a quiet resolve emanating from David, a palpable defiance that Maria could not ignore. She continued her charade, performing her duties with an almost exaggerated diligence, her smile still plastered on her face. But her eyes, David noticed, held a new, frantic glint like a cornered animal. She would still attempt her subtle manipulations, leaving little notes for David about Lily's supposed disobedience or Leo's difficult nature. But these attempts now fell flat, dismissed with a cool gaze and an unwavering focus on his children. David no longer engaged in her games. He simply observed, his mind meticulously cataloguing every desperate maneuver, every veiled threat, every flicker of her true, malevolent self. The children, sensing the shift in their father, began to bloom more fully, their laughter echoing through the halls, a sound that Maria now seemed to find grating, her lips tightening almost imperceptibly each time. Lily, no longer shrinking from David's touch, would often recount her day with a newfound openness, sometimes describing Maria's rules in innocent tones that chilled David to the bone. She spoke of being told to be quiet when her father was on important calls, of being made to stand in the corner for spilling a tiny drop of juice, or of Maria telling her she was too clumsy to help in the kitchen. David listened, his heart aching, but his resolve solidified. He would gently affirm Lily, reminding her that accidents happen, that her voice was beautiful, and that she was always allowed to be herself. Leo, mirroring his sister's newfound ease, would babble excitedly, his small hands reaching for David, his face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy in his father's presence. The stark contrast between the children's vibrant spirits now and their subdued demeanor just weeks ago was the most damning evidence of all, a living testament to Maria's cruelty and David's negligence. Maria, increasingly frustrated by her diminishing control and David's impenetrable calm, began to make more overt mistakes, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the pressure. One afternoon, as David worked from his home office, he overheard a sharp, angry whisper from the kitchen, followed by a sudden crash. He rushed in to find Lily standing by the sink, her face pale, a shattered ceramic plate on the floor at her feet. Maria stood over her, her face contorted with barely contained fury, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "You clumsy, useless girl. You never do anything right. Now look what you've done. You'll pay for this, I promise you." Before Maria could even raise her hand, David stepped between them, his presence an unyielding wall. His voice, though quiet, resonated with an authority that left no room for argument. "Maria, that is enough. Lily, are you all right, my dear?" He knelt beside his trembling daughter, gently checking her for cuts, his eyes never leaving Maria. Startled by David's sudden appearance and the raw fury in his eyes, quickly retreated, her face paling. She stammered, "Mr. Thorne, I was just trying to teach her responsibility. She's so careless." But her words rang hollow, stripped of their power by the undeniable venom David had just witnessed. He didn't respond to her, his focus entirely on Lily, who was now clinging to his leg, tears welling in her eyes, but a flicker of relief also present. He calmly helped Lily pick up the larger pieces of the plate, then instructed her to go to her room, promising to join her shortly. As Lily scurried away, David turned to Maria, his voice low and dangerous, each word a hammer blow. "Maria, your services are no longer required. You will pack your belongings and leave this house immediately." He watched her face crumble, the shock and disbelief warring with a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. Maria's eyes narrowed, a cold, calculating glint replacing the shock. She tried one last desperate maneuver, her voice dripping with false concern. "Mr. Thorne, please think of the children. Who will care for them? I've been like a mother to them since Eleanor's departure. They need me. You're always so busy." She attempted to play on his guilt, to remind him of his past absences, but David was no longer vulnerable to her manipulation. He simply stared at her, his gaze unwavering, and then a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a smile devoid of warmth, filled only with grim satisfaction. "Maria, I am well aware of what you have been to my children, and I assure you they will be far better off without you." He then revealed a small, sleek device in his hand, its tiny lens glinting. "I have everything I need. Now pack your things." The color drained from Maria's face, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. She looked at the device, then at David, the realization dawning that her reign of terror was over, her carefully planned future of stolen wealth shattered. Her composure finally broke, replaced by a torrent of rage and fear. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you know everything. You were never here. You were never there for your children. I did everything. I deserve this." Her voice rose, shrill and unhinged, revealing the depths of her resentment and entitlement, a raw, ugly truth finally laid bare. David simply watched her, his expression unreadable, knowing that her outburst, her confession, was yet another piece of the intricate puzzle he had meticulously put together, a final damning confirmation of her guilt. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for justice had arrived. Maria's face, contorted with a raw, ugly rage, twisted further as she realized the full extent of David's meticulous preparation. Her initial fury, a wild, untamed beast, slowly began to morph into a chilling, calculated hatred, a silent promise of future venom. She knew she was caught, her carefully woven web of deceit and cruelty unraveled by the very man she had so cunningly manipulated. There was no escape, no plausible denial, not with the cold, unblinking eye of the camera having borne witness to her every transgression. With a final, guttural snarl, a sound more animal than human, she spun on her heel, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and stormed towards her living quarters, the silence she left behind feeling heavier, more profound than any noise. David watched her go, a sense of grim satisfaction warring with the lingering ache of betrayal in his chest. The air, once thick with unspoken tension, now felt cleansed, lighter, as if a suffocating weight had been lifted from the very foundation of the house. In the immediate aftermath, a profound, almost sacred quiet descended upon the grand home, just stark contrast to the storm that had just raged. David found Lily huddled in her room, a small trembling ball beneath her covers, her favorite stuffed bunny clutched tightly to her chest. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, his presence a comforting warmth, and gently stroked her hair, his touch a silent promise of protection. Lily, slowly emerging from beneath the blanket, looked up at him, her eyes wide and wet, but no longer filled with the abject terror he had grown used to seeing. He told her in soft, reassuring tones that Maria was gone, that she was safe now, and that he would never let anyone hurt her or Leo again. He held her close, feeling the fragile tremor of her small body gradually subside, replaced by a tentative peace, a fragile hope blossoming in the quiet space between them. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lily truly relaxed in his arms, her small sigh a balm to his wounded soul. The next few hours were a whirlwind of quiet, decisive action. While Maria, under the watchful eyes of a security team David had discreetly called, packed her belongings in a furious, resentful silence, David devoted himself entirely to his children. He held Leo close, the baby's innocent gurgles a stark reminder of the purity he was fighting to protect. He made them a simple, comforting meal, sitting with them at the kitchen table, talking softly, letting their laughter, once so rare, fill the space. He watched as Lily, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence reached for his hand across the table, her small fingers intertwining with his, a silent affirmation of a bond reforged and strengthened. The house, once a gilded cage, slowly began to transform into a sanctuary, a haven of warmth and rediscovered affection. As soon as Maria was escorted from the premises, her face a mask of bitter defeat and simmering malice, David immediately called Sarah Jennings. His voice, though still laced with the residue of the day's emotional turmoil, was clear and resolute. He recounted the final confrontation, the chilling outburst, and the irrefutable evidence he had painstakingly gathered. Sarah listened intently, her own outrage palpable through the phone line, her professional resolve hardening with each detail. She assured David that they had an airtight case, not just for theft and fraud, but for severe emotional and psychological abuse, backed by the surveillance footage, the financial records, Eleanor's letter, and now Mrs. Gable's crucial testimony. The legal wheels were set in motion with a swiftness and precision that reflected David's formidable influence and Sarah's unwavering commitment to justice. In the days that followed, the transformation in Lily and Leo was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit when nurtured with love and safety. Lily's laughter became a constant, joyous melody throughout the house, her steps lighter, her eyes sparkling with a newfound vivacity. She drew pictures not of shadowy figures, but of bright, colorful flowers, of herself and David holding hands, of Leo playing happily in the sun. She spoke freely, sharing her thoughts and feelings without fear, her small voice no longer hesitant but clear and strong. Leo, no longer retreating into wary silence, blossomed into a vibrant, inquisitive toddler, his babbling evolving into recognizable words, his tiny hands constantly reaching out for David, his face alight with an infectious, unadulterated joy. David, watching them, felt a profound sense of peace finally settle over him, a quiet understanding that he had, at last, truly honored Eleanor's memory by protecting their precious children. He spent countless hours with them, rediscovering the simple, profound joys of parenthood he had neglected for too long. They built forts in the living room, read stories until their voices were hoarse, and explored the sprawling garden, discovering hidden treasures in every corner. David's work, though still demanding, now took a back seat to the unwavering priority of his children's well-being. He delegated more, streamlined operations, and intentionally carved out sacred time for Lily and Leo, understanding that true wealth was not measured in corporate empires, but in the laughter and love shared within the walls of his home. He learned to bake cookies with Lily, tolerating the flour-dusted kitchen with a smile, and taught Leo to kick a soft ball across the lawn, his heart swelling with pride at every small victory. The house, once a monument to his solitary grief, was now filled with the vibrant, messy, beautiful chaos of a family truly living, truly loving. The legal proceedings, though carefully managed to shield the children from any further trauma, were relentless and thorough. Sarah Jennings, with David's full support and resources, compiled a comprehensive dossier that left no room for doubt. The surveillance footage, edited to highlight Maria's most egregious acts of cruelty and theft, was devastating. The financial records, meticulously traced, laid bare her sophisticated scheme to pilfer Eleanor's inheritance. Mrs. Gable's heartfelt testimony, describing the subtle signs of abuse she had witnessed, added a crucial layer of human validation to the cold, hard evidence. Maria, though initially defiant, quickly crumbled under the weight of the irrefutable proof, her attempts at manipulation and victimhood falling flat against the mountain of facts. The justice system, often slow and cumbersome, moved with uncharacteristic speed and certainty, propelled by the sheer volume and clarity of the evidence against her. David, though still carrying the scars of his past negligence, stood firm, a pillar of strength for his children, ready to face whatever came next, knowing he had done everything in his power to right the wrongs and protect the most precious parts of his world. The courtroom, a place usually steeped in a somber formality, buzzed with a quiet tension as the verdict was finally read. Sarah Jennings, a formidable presence in her tailored suit, stood beside David, her gaze unwavering as the judge delivered the pronouncement. The mountain of evidence David had meticulously gathered, from the chilling surveillance footage to the irrefutable financial forensics and Mrs. Gable's poignant testimony, had left no room for doubt. Maria, her face a grotesque mask of defiance and disbelief, stood rigid, her eyes darting wildly, a cornered animal refusing to accept its fate. Her initial outbursts, her desperate attempts to paint herself as the victim, to twist the narrative with venomous accusations against David's perceived neglect, had fallen flat, each word only serving to further expose the depths of her malice and manipulation. The judge's voice, clear and firm, outlined the charges: theft, fraud, and, most importantly, the severe emotional and psychological abuse inflicted upon two innocent children. Justice, slow but inexorable, had finally caught up with her. As the sentence was delivered, a wave of profound relief washed over David, a physical sensation that threatened to buckle his knees. It was not triumph, he felt, but an exhaustion so deep it resonated in his very bones, mingled with a quiet, solemn satisfaction. The long, arduous battle was over, the shadows that had loomed over his children's lives finally banished. He glanced at Sarah, offering a silent nod of gratitude, recognizing the unwavering strength and dedication she had brought to their cause. Maria's final desperate glare, filled with an unadulterated hatred that promised no peace, was met with David's steady, unyielding gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only the unwavering resolve of a father who had fought for his children, a man who had stared into the abyss of his past failings and emerged, not unscathed but undeniably stronger, more centered, and irrevocably committed to the light. The gavel's final strike echoed through the room, a resounding punctuation mark on a dark chapter, signifying not just a legal victory, but a moral one, a testament to the power of truth to pierce through even the most elaborate deceptions. Returning home, the house felt different, imbued with a palpable sense of peace, a lightness that had been absent for far too long. David found Lily and Leo playing in the sun-drenched living room, building an elaborate castle out of cushions and blankets, their laughter a joyful symphony that filled every corner. He knelt, drawing them into a warm embrace, feeling their small bodies press against him, their innocent trust a balm to his weary soul. Lily, her eyes sparkling with unburdened joy, recounted tales of their imaginary kingdom, her voice strong and clear, free from the hesitant whispers that had once defined her. Leo, now a boisterous toddler, clapped his hands with delight, pointing at the dragon as a discarded throw pillow, and babbling with an infectious energy that warmed David's heart. He watched them, a profound sense of gratitude swelling within him, knowing that their vibrant, uninhibited spirits were the truest measure of their healing, the most precious reward for the battle he had waged. The house, once a gilded cage of hidden fears, was now truly a home, a sanctuary built on the foundations of unconditional love and unwavering protection. The support from Mrs. Gable and Sarah Jennings continued to be a quiet, comforting presence in their lives. Mrs. Gable would still bring her homemade cookies, her kind eyes reflecting a deep understanding and a shared joy in the children's renewed happiness. She would often sit with David in the garden, sharing stories of Eleanor, reminiscing about her warmth and her dreams for her children, gently helping David to fully embrace her memory, not as a source of pain but as a guiding light. Sarah, beyond her professional duties, remained a trusted friend, offering not just legal advice but empathetic counsel, reminding David of his strength and the profound impact of his unwavering commitment to his family. These connections, forged in the crucible of adversity, reinforced David's understanding that he was not alone, that the journey of healing and reconstruction was a shared human experience, built on compassion and mutual respect. David, now fully present, fully engaged, found a new rhythm to his life, one that harmonized the demands of his empire with the sacred duties of fatherhood. He continued to delegate, to streamline, but his focus had irrevocably shifted. The children were his compass, their well-being his true north. He still worked, still innovated, but he did so with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that his legacy was not just in technological advancements, but in the love and security he built within his home. He learned to cherish the small imperfect moments, the flower-dusted kitchen after a baking adventure with Lily, the muddy footprints after a garden exploration with Leo, the quiet evenings spent reading stories, their heads nestled against his shoulder. These were the true treasures, the moments that filled the emotional void left by Eleanor's departure, not with forgetfulness, but with a vibrant, living love that honored her memory in the most profound way. The future, once uncertain and shadowed by grief and guilt, now unfurled before them, bright with the promise of new beginnings, a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of family. 2 years later, the Grand Thorn estate, once a place of silent sorrow and hidden fear, now vibrated with the joyous cacophony of a family truly alive. Lily, a vibrant 8-year-old, her eyes sparkling with unburdened mirth, skipped through the sprawling garden, her hand firmly clasped in Leo's, now a boisterous 3-year-old. They laughed, their voices a symphony of pure, unadulterated happiness, as they chased butterflies amidst the blooming roses David had helped them plant. David, observing them from the sun-drenched patio, felt a profound sense of peace bloom within his chest, a warmth that had replaced the gnawing emptiness of his past. He had learned to embrace the beautiful messiness of life, finding solace and immense joy in every scraped knee, every shared story, every flower-dusted kitchen after a cookie-baking session. His empire still thrived, but his true legacy, he knew, was being forged in these precious moments, in the unwavering love he poured into his children. Their days were now filled with shared adventures, from building elaborate blanket forts in the living room to exploring the wonders of the local science museum. David, no longer a distant figure, was an active participant in every facet of their lives, his presence a constant source of comfort and security. He read them bedtime stories, his voice soft and resonant, and tucked them in with a kiss, lingering to watch their peaceful slumber, a silent promise to protect their dreams. Lily, confident and articulate, excelled in school, her creativity blossoming, while Leo, full of boundless energy, explored the world with an infectious curiosity, his every milestone celebrated with enthusiastic cheers. The scars of the past, though not entirely forgotten, had faded into distant echoes, replaced by the vibrant tapestry of a future woven with threads of resilience, forgiveness, and an unshakable bond. The transformation was complete, a testament to the power of truth and the enduring strength of unconditional love. The house, once a symbol of his solitary success, had become a true home, a sanctuary where laughter was abundant and every corner held a cherished memory. David often thought of Eleanor, not with the sharp pang of grief, but with a gentle, loving remembrance, knowing that he had finally fulfilled his promise to her, nurturing their children with the same boundless love she would have given. He had learned that true wealth was not measured in corporate empires, but in the innocent trust of a child's hand in his, in the warmth of a shared embrace, in the quiet joy of a family rebuilt from the ashes of sorrow. The long journey had been arduous, filled with shadows and difficult truths, but it had led them to this moment, a vibrant, hopeful dawn after a long, dark night. The story of David Thorne and his children stands as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, courage can illuminate the path to justice, and love in its purest form can heal the deepest wounds. Evil may cast its long shadow, but the unwavering light of truth will always prevail, ensuring that kindness finds its reward and that the innocent are protected. What would you do to protect a child when the shadows creep where least expected? How far would you go to ensure their safety and well-being? Share your thoughts and join the conversation, for it is through our collective vigilance and boundless compassion that we build a world where every child can flourish in the embrace of unconditional love. Remember, the greatest strength lies in the courage to act, the wisdom to seek truth, and the boundless capacity to love.